and live. And what I'm going to do is as soon as it pops up for me, I will grab the URL and I'll send it around on the chat. And that way anybody who wants it can have it now. Let's see here. What am I doing? All right, so I'm going to make, since I'm here, I'm going to make Jim Leffert a co-host. Okay, Sidra Ezrahi is already a co-host, and now Sherry Leffert is going to be the host. All right, I'm abdicating all responsibility for managing this meeting. So Sidra, in terms of the screen share,
Yes.
My Zoom room is set up so that anyone can any one of the participants can screen share, only one person at a time. So that, bless you, Ellen. So that, bless you. Ellen, I can no longer mute Ellen. So Sherry, if you want to mute her,
I wanted to do that. Yeah. Okay. Great.
So Sidra, when you're sharing, no one else will be able to share. Sherry, if it so happens, sometimes it happens that someone is fumbling with their Zoom buttons.
Yes.
And they start sharing something random.
Yes.
Usually it's very innocent, like their desktop or something like that.
Right.
You as the host can go up there and stop the share.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and that way.
So do I go to where do I go to do that? To screen share?
I think up at the top.
Go to screen share?
Yeah, where it says stop share, I think you can do that as the host.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, so don't hesitate. I'm available by phone, Sherry. So if you have any trouble, feel free to give me a call, and I'll try to walk you through it. But
Can you give me your phone number just so I have it too?
Oh, hello.
Can you give me your phone number?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. So first of all, Sidra, I'm going to put in to you personally. I'm putting in the YouTube URL. So if you copy and paste that somewhere, then you can give it to everyone who would like to see this presentation and wasn't able to. And then my phone number is 617-462-9332, and that is also in the chat to you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
So please don't hesitate to call. I'm very happy to try to help. The only time I won't be able to talk is if I'm in the middle of transferring my dogs from me to my ex. Other than that.
Sounds very complex.
It's very complex operation. All right, everyone. Shavua Tov, everybody. Thank you so much, Sidra. I'm really looking forward to seeing this on the YouTube. And just so you know, Sidra, I did actually read poems by Paul Celan and Yehuda Amichai and Dan Pagas all week for our poetry group at CCD. So people who are part of that group will be well primed for your presentation.
Okay, well, I look forward to having a conversation another time, and have a good trip, Jim. Hi, Davy. Hi, Judith.
Hi, Sidra. Hi.
Hi, Cindy. Hi, Helene.
Isn't this wonderful? What time is it there in Jerusalem?
It is 5:54 p.m.
Oh, goodness. And we're just still pulling ourselves together and waking up. And I can see you in your home there in Jerusalem and picture your view. You have that beautiful view that looks out on the hills.
Well,
what beautiful view! If I remember, it was.
Wasn't it?
I mean, you could see a lot of frum individuals on their way to services. That's what I remember.
We don't have a view of the hills actually, but if you have a good imagination.
I guess I do.
Sorry, if you remember it that way, it's fine.
Okay, so here's a headshot.
But I do remember with great pleasure the memory of visiting you on a Friday evening in Jerusalem.
A number of people who are on this Zoom have visited or should be or will be visiting at some point.
Yeah, I just got an email. I'm sure she'll be on from Helen Horowitz, who said she was your dorm mate.
Not
back in
dorm,
college.
we know each other from Wellesley. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So she was. I hope she got on, or will
Yeah.
get on. She gave me the.
People who are so far who are on. Well, everybody is special, but from near and far, really excited to see everybody.
And here's somebody. I don't know. Is it Carol? Is that your name? C. Johnson?
Oh, I'm Cindy.
Cindy.
Cindy, I'm from New Hampshire, and Sidra has for many years now been one of my walking partners around one of the lakes here. And
Oh.
yes, and she's walked me in more ways than one.
Oh.
Yeah.
Metaphorically and literally.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be with you all this Sunday morning or Sunday evening.
Oh. How is it there in New Hampshire? Lots of snow?
Oh, it's snowy and it's cold, although it's now in the teens as opposed to it was, it had hit pretty cold, close to zero. So it's but it's still around here we spend the time getting ourselves outdoors and not being, trying to be intrepid about it, because otherwise you get pretty
pushed down.
Yeah. Where are you calling in from?
Oh, lots of us are in Cambridge and surroundings.
Okay, so you still have snow too. It's just a different form of a challenge. Ours is just heating wood stoves and shoveling and skiing in the fields. You have to get your cars out and all that from the streets, don't you?
Well, it's not so bad. It's pretty well plowed and it's melting. And it's getting pretty dirty. So.
Hi, Sherry.
Oh, nice to see you.
Oh, lovely to see
you.
I just want to say, I wish you would stop talking about the snow, because I have snow envy. And the only thing that is going to sort of mitigate my snow envy is that it's scheduled to snow in Jerusalem on Wednesday. We'll see.
Oh, wow.
Take pictures, Sidra.
Sidra, I remember when we were there in one winter and when it snowed, everyone was so excited. They all ran out as if they were having a festival.
No, what happens in Jerusalem actually when there's snow is that the Americans and the Russians put on, their coats and hats, which they haven't been able to use for years, and they run out. And all the other Israelis run to the grocery stores and stock up on bread, because they know how to prepare for war and snow. So that's usually what happens. Sure, hi. Oh, it's so great to see you.
Well, we have some two new visitors here. We have Peter Kussel.
Sidra, we were looking at your history and see that you grew up with snow in Toronto, or
no. Bernie grew up in Montreal. I grew up in Chicago.
Oh, Bernie, I see.
A lot of snow there too. Hi, Sidra.
Hi, it's great to see you, Harry.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Bernie.
Oh, hi, Bernie.
Hi, Bernie.
Bernie's got his beer in hand.
Hi, Sherry.
Back in a couple of hours.
Oh my God, Cindy's here too, and
Cindy and Davey
and Judith.
Great.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Hello.
Oh my God.
And there's David Green from down the street.
Holy.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, we got all these people. Look
And
at that.
Noah is here from, I guess, from Princeton. And
Oh, good.
And this is Josh Rubenstein.
Join worship and study.
Oh, hi, Josh. Hi, Josh.
everybody.
Haven't
Yeah,
seen you
nice
in
to see you.
God.
Oh.
Whoa.
Oh,
Wow,
Josh is
look,
here.
Josh and
And Maureen, it's lovely to meet you. We have a friend in common, right?
Very, very nice to meet you, Sidra.
I mean, I should be just like shouting across the street to you, right? At this point.
Yeah, right. You live somewhere nearby.
Ay, Rosas.
Lovely
Yeah.
to be invited. Thank you so much.
You go, you know what, you go and.
I just want to see who else is here. Oh, yeah, yeah. Kaya's there. Judith Wexler.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Hi, Judith.
Hi.
Nice group. Nice
Hi,
group.
Anita.
Hi.
Anita's calling in. You're in Cambridge, aren't you? Judith? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in Cambridge. Can't go anywhere. How are you, Sidra?
I'm fine. I was just saying that we're waiting for snow here, but you guys have had more than your fill, so I should.
Are you hoping to get to New Hampshire this summer?
I don't know. We'll see. We're hoping, but we'll see. We're following the, all the signs.
Right.
Anyway, I would actually there are probably more people coming, but
Yeah.
I'd like to start, Sherry, we can wait maybe just 2 or 3 more minutes.
Yeah,
because,
let's just wait till it's really 11. Oh, it's 11:01 now.
well, here it's 6:01, and I just don't want to.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So if that's okay with you, I suggest that if you have any comments or questions or anything, you write them in the chat. And then, after I stop giving my little spiel, consider any questions or comments that you have.
Okay.
When I just switch to speaker view, does everybody get speaker view? Or is it just me?
Just
me?
you.
Oh, okay. I'm not used to being the host, so you'll have.
No, anybody can get speaker view if they
Yeah,
want.
I didn't know if I was changing it for the whole group, so I just wanted to check. Okay. Well, let me fill up the 2 minute, 1 minute to allow to more people by giving a little introduction of Sidra. See if we can all mute. I guess I have to.
We need to mute ourselves.
Yes, please.
We need to mute ourselves.
Mute yourself.
We've got
Yeah.
This may be a little rocky because I'm not used to being the host. Rabbi Jim usually does all this work, but so we have Sidra, and she doesn't really need an introduction, but I just want to run through some of her wonderful achievements. She is Professor Emeritus of General and Comparative Literature at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She has written on subjects ranging from representations of the Holocaust in post-war Israeli, European, and American culture in the configurations of exile and homecoming in contemporary Jewish literature. Her books include By Words Alone, The Holocaust in Literature, Booking Passage, Exile and Homecoming in the Modern Jewish Imagination. She has also published 2 books in Hebrew, Chipus Hama'asa HaYehudi and Shlosha Paitanim. In 2007, she became a Guggenheim Fellow for her current project, Figuring Jerusalem, Politics and Poetics in the Sacred Center. In November 2019, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. It is my great pleasure to have Sidra join us.
Well, first of all, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. I'm not even going to mention those who have come on recently in the last couple of minutes that include family members and dear friends. And afterwards, when we have a chance to schmooze, we'll call ourselves and each other by name. I'm really glad, especially to see you in this format, which over the course of the year, we've all gotten used to actually. Incarcerated as we've been in our homes, we are in some ways more connected than ever before. I want to thank the intrepid Sherry Leffert and Rabbi Jim and everyone else who made this session possible, but especially all of you who've gathered literally from down the street in Jerusalem to Vancouver, Canada, and many places in between. But I guess the congregation is located, at least that they are the hosts, is the Worship and Study Congregation located in Cambridge. That has been our spiritual home for many, many years when we're in the States. And we can talk about that some other time, perhaps. I have to say that it is a little strange for me to see my worship and study buddies without a grumbling stomach, and the chocolate that Ilana and Mark Cohen always provide at the end of Yom Kippur. Everybody should be muting themselves except for me, please, even though I appreciate the responses. Because we usually come in for Yom Kippur, and Ilana and Mark, I saw Ilana briefly, I think she's on this call, always provide at the end of Yom Kippur. But I also really welcome friends, family, and colleagues from all over the globe. For those of you who can allow yourselves a midday Valentine's Day indulgence, and for those of us in Israel whose whiskey or wine bring the working day to a close, we'll raise a glass at the end to friendship, to perseverance, to good health, to a healthy polity, and to the persistence of the beauty in our time and space. And everybody should be muted except me. I think, Sherry, that you as a host can mute everybody. I'm not sure I know how to do that, though.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm doing it.
Okay. Once again, please. So I want to say a few words introducing the three poets and try to justify bundling them as paitanim, or liturgical poets. And those of you on this in this on my screen, you range from dear friends who are very familiar with much of this material to dear friends and family who are not so familiar with this material. So I'll try to sort of appeal to the various levels, and then in the conversation, please feel free to ask your questions. I did send out some material to familiarize you with each of the poets, and if you didn't get a chance to look at it and you have time after the session, please do. Some of the references I sent include my own work, but also various online analyses of the more familiar poems by these three poets. And I'm going to engage with a few of these poems or parts of poems, and also at least indicate to you the ways in which I challenge some of the prevailing ways of reading them. So let's start with a few biographical facts. Our three poets, or paitanim, and I will explain that term in a minute, were born in German-speaking communities in the 1920s, and each changed their name, or his name, as they evolved into poets in their respective post-war communities. Judah Amichai was born Ludwig Pfeiffer in Würzburg, Bavaria in 1924. He was raised in an observant family. His religious upbringing at home in synagogue and religious school was mixed with German language and culture in the public spaces. His family would migrate to Palestine in 1936, escaping the worst of the atrocities that awaited the Jews of Europe. Amichai became the uncrowned poet laureate of Jerusalem and lived till the end of the millennium. Pesach Anchel, who would become Paul Celan, and Severin Pagis, who would become Dan Pagis, were born in the Bukovina region of Romania. Celan in 1920 in multicultural Czernowitz, Pagis in 1929 in Radouch, which was more provincial but still fairly cosmopolitan. They both survived the war in Transnistria and both died fairly young. Celan died by his own hand in Paris in 1970. Pagis died in Jerusalem in 1986. As children, each of these poets was exposed to Hebrew and some Yiddish in addition to their native German, and these languages would form the layers of their personal as well as their poetic identity. All three would engage in various literary activities as poets, translators, teachers, and or scholars. As you've already noticed, all three of them changed at least part of their name after the war. Pesach Anshel, who as a child attended both the German language school in Chernovich and the Zionist Jewish school Safa Ivriya, would survive the war in labor camps, move to Bucharest and then Vienna before finally relocating to Paris. He would change his name after the war several times, eventually becoming Paul Celan, which is an anagram of Anshel. And again, Severin Pagis would become Dan Pagis in Israel, and Ludwig Pfeiffer became Yuda Michai. If there's time and interest, I would be happy to talk in the discussion period about the circumstances and resonances of these name changes. These three poets also represent three avenues taken by survivors of the German-speaking Jewish world. Celan, living in Paris, was very active in literary circles in post-war Europe as poet and as translator. But writing in German, he was tormented by what had happened to the language that had gone through what he called the 1,000 darknesses of death-bringing speech. The brokenness of his poetic utterances reflects that, and also reflects an attempt to reconstruct the world in its wake. His poetry was referred to by Adorno and others as hermetic, but those who spend time studying or even meditating on the poetry not only find many points of entry, but also profound internal conversations and personal connections. And his poetry evolved over the years, specifically incorporating Hebrew in his last years. Yuda Michai and Dan Pagis lived as adults in or near Jerusalem and wrote in Hebrew. Since, as I noted, Amichai's family had arrived in Palestine in 1936 when he was only 12, Hebrew was his second mother tongue. Pagis, who arrived in Palestine in 1946, had learned some Hebrew as a child, and we even have a Hebrew postcard that he wrote to his father in Palestine in the 1930s. The family story is a complicated and a very difficult one. Pagis's father left for Palestine in 1934, thinking that he would bring his family with him. Hi, Norm. Would you mute yourself, Norm?
Sorry.
Hi, dear. Good to see you. He went to Palestine in 1934, thinking that he would bring his family with him. But shortly after he left, Pagis's mother, his beloved mother, died during an operation. And he was raised then by his grandparents in Radouts while his father was in Palestine. That would become the source of posthumous conversations between them, and we can talk about that too later if you wish. He would eventually become one of the most innovative poets in modern Hebrew and also a professor of medieval Hebrew poetry at the Hebrew University. The three poets met at the home of Yehuda and Hannah Amichai in 1969 during Paul Celan's brief sojourn in Jerusalem, just months before his suicide in the Seine. I use that meeting, which in the case of Amichai and Celan led to a deep friendship and correspondence after Celan returned to Paris, as a kind of fulcrum to bring these three together on other grounds. Each of these poets was embraced by their respective societies, or at least specific poems were embraced, for better and for worse. And I want to touch on some of the ways that poetry gets incorporated into public space. Actually, that is partly the definition or primary dimension of the paitan, who in most cases wrote his piyut as a poetic act meant to be incorporated into public spaces of worship. Again, the word paitan, for those who don't know Hebrew, you can hear the word poet there actually, is a sacred poet. The piyut has its roots in the Book of Psalms. It's a sacred poem meant to be shared with the public in designated times and places. Think of the Psalms chanted by the Levi'im on the steps of the temple as the site and the source of the piyut. The earliest piyutim that we have after the destruction of the temples are from the 5th, 6th centuries in Palestine, which were rediscovered in the Cairo Geniza at the end of the 19th century. Yanai is considered to be one of the fathers of ancient piyut, along with Yosei ben Yosei and Elazar HaKalir. And once again, I love your responses, but all of those of you who have come on recently, please mute yourselves. Haggis, who, as I mentioned, was a scholar of medieval Hebrew poetry, is clearly in dialogue with Yanai in more than one poem. The Paitan, the sacred poet, would write poetic interpretations of topical, historical, and religious events and prayers for salvation, along with conversing with biblical texts. To this day, even in the Reform and Conservative prayer books and Machzorim, there are medieval piyutim that are among the most beautiful Hebrew poetry, and for many of us, break up the monotony of the rest of the prayers. I want to mention specifically, I hope Ilana is still on the call. I want to mention specifically the piyut that Ilana Cohen always sings on Yom Kippur, El Nora Alila, which was written by Moshe ibn Ezra in the 11th, 12th centuries. And I am going to play, I hope this will work, an Italian version of this piyut. So bear with me for a minute.
El Noran Alila, El Noran Alila, Amsilanu Mechila, Bisharat Anenila. Mele mispar keruim, Lechangayim noseim, Unsaledin, Bechila, Bishangad Anenila. El Noran Alila, El Noran Alila, Amsilanu Mechila, Bishangad Anenila. Michael Sar Israel, Eliyahu veGabriel, Vaseuna Ageula, Bishangad Anenila. El Noran Alila, El Noran Alila, Amsilanu Mechila, Bishangad Anenila.
Were you all able to hear that? Great.
Yes, it was wonderful.
Thank you, dear.
And now we know how the tune really goes.
There are usually also topical references that can be deduced from the piyut. And there are a number, hi Michal, Michal, it's great to see you. And there are a number of wonderful scholars of piyut in our time who are doing wonderful work on the piyut team.
Sidra, you're fading a little bit. Maybe you need to get closer to your microphone.
Okay, can you hear me better now? Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. So in addition to the religious worshipful stance and word plays and poetic commentaries on biblical themes, there are usually also topical references that can be found in these piyutim. Many of them are reflections of historical challenges and instances of martyrdom through common tropes and conventional references, such as the Akedah. See, for example, the piyut of Ephraim of Bon, 12th century, in which Isaac is actually depicted as slaughtered and brought back to life. Shalom Spiegel wrote about this in The Last Trial. In our time, the writer Shai Agnon saw his craft as a sofer or a prose writer as actually a surrogate for his real destiny as a paitan. And he wrote a few stories about paitanim, but he felt that somehow he had missed his real calling as a paitan. In contemporary Israel, the piyut, as I've suggested, is alive and well as a poetic genre in both religious and secular spheres. But there are other poetic influences on these three poets, especially metaphysical English poetry from the 17th century through the 20th. Think of the range from John Donne through Emily Dickinson to Wallace Stevens. So what are the specific characteristics of the piyut that I find in these three contemporary poets in post-war Europe and Israel? When we talk about metaphysical poetry in the English tradition, like the tradition of piyut, we usually refer to a poetic and existential pose that views the world as organic and infused with the divine, but not in a simplistic way, rather through the complexities of poetic utterance. But there's another reason for bundling these poets, in my opinion, as paitanim, and that is what I call the dialogical element that each of these poets reflects. And I want to explain that briefly in terms of the dialectics of Hebrew and Israeli life. And all of you are familiar with this. In Israel, it's always either summer or winter. And I can tell you right now, it's summer, but we're expecting winter in 2 days. You're either dati or chiloni, you're religious or you're secular. It's either day or night. There's no in-between states in this country. And that reflects itself in every aspect of our life. I hope to elaborate this a little bit by focusing first on the public appropriation of each of these poets, which in a way blunts the effects of their poetry. That is, I'm arguing that these poets are truly capacious, truly dialogical in the face of the in the face of the dialectical temptations of modern Hebrew life. In terms of public appropriation of each of these poets, Ceylon in post-war Europe and Pagis in Israel were both incorporated into public space and public commemorative occasions. Ceylon is the best known of all of them, particularly for those who are familiar with post-war European literature. And I'm very happy that my stepdaughter, Tamar Avishai, is, or I saw she was on the call, I hope she still is, because she did a wonderful podcast on Todesfuge by Ceylon. And I am going to play his reading of it in German, and I hope you can, even if you don't understand German, you can follow it, and I will then read a translation. So. No, that's, yeah, there we go.
Todesfuge. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken sie abends, wir trinken sie mittags und morgens, wir trinken sie nachts, wir trinken und trinken. Wir schaufeln ein Grab in den Lüften, da liegt man nicht eng. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, der spielt mit den Schlangen, der schreibt, wenn es dunkelt nach Deutschland, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete. Er schreibt es und tritt vor das Haus, und es blitzen die Sterne, er pfeift seine Rüden herbei, er pfeift seine Juden hervor, lässt schaufeln ein Grab in der Erde. Er befiehlt uns, spielt auf nun zum Tanz. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken dich nachts, wir trinken dich morgens und mittags, wir trinken dich abends, wir trinken und trinken. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, der spielt mit den Schlangen, der schreibt, wenn es dunkelt nach Deutschland, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete, dein aschenes Haar, Sulamit. Wir schaufeln ein Grab in den Lüften, da liegt man nicht eng. Er ruft, stecht tiefer ins Erdreich, ihr einen, ihr anderen spielt weiter zum Tanz auf. Er greift nach dem Eisen im Gurt, er schwingt, seine Augen sind blau. Stecht tiefer die Spaten, ihr einen, ihr anderen spielt weiter zum Tanz auf. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken dich nachts, wir trinken dich mittags und morgens, wir trinken dich abends, wir trinken und trinken. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete, dein aschenes Haar, Sulamite, er spielt mit den Schlangen. Er ruft, spielt süßer den Tod, der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Er ruft, streicht dunkler die Geigen, dann steigt ihr als Rauch in die Luft. Dann habt ihr ein Grab in den Wolken, da liegt man nicht eng. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken dich nachts, wir trinken dich mittags. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Wir trinken dich abends und morgens, wir trinken und trinken. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland, sein Auge ist blau. Er trifft dich mit bleierner Kugel, er trifft dich genau. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete. Er hetzt seine Rüden auf uns, er schenkt uns ein Grab in der Luft. Er spielt mit den Schlangen und träumet. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Dein goldenes Haar, Margarete. Dein aschenes Haar, Sulamit.
It's actually hard to talk after that, but I'll try. Can you all hear me?
Parzilan, Todesfuge.
Whoops, what happened?
Now, your sound comes and goes. I don't know if it has anything to do with you being in Israel or what it is.
Wir tauchen ein Grab in den Lüften.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened.
Try to get as close to your.
Just a minute. I'm not sure how that happened, but anyway. Okay, are we back? This is a translation. Can you hear me?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, this is a translation by John Felsterner, my beloved belated friend, colleague. Black milk of daybreak, we drink it at evening. We drink it at midday and morning. We drink it at night. We drink and we drink. We shovel a grave in the air. There you won't lie too cramped. A man lives in the house. He plays with his vipers. He writes. He writes when it grows dark to Deutschland. Your golden hair, Margareta. He writes it and steps out of doors and the stars are all sparkling. He whistles his hounds to come close. He whistles his Jews into rows and has them shovel a grave in the ground. He commands us to play up for the dance. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink you at morning and midday. We drink you at evening. We drink and we drink. A man lives in the house. He plays with his vipers. He writes when it grows dark to Deutschland. Your golden hair, Margareta, your ashen hair, Shulamit. We shovel a grave in the air. There you won't lie too cramped. He shouts, jab the earth deeper, you lot there. You others sing up and play. He grabs for the rod in his belt. He swings it. His eyes are so blue. Jab your spades deeper, you lot. Here, you others play on for the dancing. Black milk of daybreak. We drink you at night. We drink you at midday and morning. We drink you at evening. We drink and we drink. A man lives in the house. Your golden is haar, Margareta. Your ashen is haar, Shulamit. He plays with his vipers. He shouts, play death more sweetly. This death is a master from Deutschland. He shouts, scrape your strings darker. You'll rise then as smoke to the sky. You'll have a grave then in the clouds. There you won't lie too cramped. Black milk of daybreak. We drink you at night. We drink you at midday. Death is a master aus Deutschland. We drink you at evening and morning. We drink and we drink. This death is ein Meister aus Deutschland. His eye it is blue. He shoots you with shot made of lead, shoots you level and true. A man lives in his house. Your golden is haar, Margareta. He looses his hounds on us, grants us a grave in the air. He plays with his vipers and daydreams. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Dein goldenes Haar, Margareta. Dein aschenes Haar, Shulamit. And now I want to sort of move directly. I mean, I'm tempted to just stop here, but I want to respond. I want to have a chance to have all three of them, their voices heard. So I'm going to read another poem, which is equally well known in the country in which it was written. Pagis's poem, which many of you probably know, Katuv bi paron bakaron hechatum. And even if you don't know much Hebrew, I think that you'll be, just a second. Okay, 1 second, whoops. Why did my whole screen get very small all of a sudden? Just, I want to do share screen. Can you see this?
Not yet. No, share screen and then click on it.
I know. There we are. Just a sec. Okay. You disappeared for a minute.
Okay, we have it.
Okay. So this is Dan Pagis. Katuv, and many of you know this poem. Katuv bi paron bekaron hechatum. כאן במשלוח הזה אני חווה עם הבל בני. אם תראו את בני הגדול, קין בן אדם, תגידו לו שאני. Written in pencil in the sealed boxcar. Here in this boxcar, I am Eve, with Abel my son. If you see my other son, Cain, son of Adam, tell him that I...
J'ai oublié que, waouh, j'ai oublié que.
Vivi, mute yourself, darling. Now, I just say a word about this poem. Many of you know the poem. It's actually been inscribed next to the boxcar at Yad Vashem and appropriated for all kinds of public occasions. And again, if we have time, we can talk about it and what it means when a poem like this one by Pagis or the one that we just read by Celan are appropriated by the public in ways that blunt its much more powerful influence and resonance. So one more poem that also, I'm not going to read the whole poem, that also has a public resonance that many of you know. And that's, I think I'm not going to project it because I seem to get into trouble when I do. So I'm just going to read the first lines. That's Yuda Michai's El Malei Rachamim. And many of you know this poem, and you also know the El Malei Rachamim poem, prayer, which is also part of the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Il Malei, Ha'el Malei Rachamim, Hayu Rachamim Ba'olam, Velo Rak Bo. God, full of mercy. If God were not so full of mercy, there would be mercy in the world, and not only in him. Now, again, we could spend hours just talking about this one poem, and I've only read the first few lines of it. So what does it mean that Amichai's poem is incorporated into the Sidur or the Machzor? What does it mean that Pagis's poem is signed on Yad Vashem, the place of public remembrance of the Holocaust? So in both cases, it's a sign of their widespread influence and resonance. In Israel, almost no Jewish wedding, and also elsewhere, takes place without an Amichai poem. But again, such a wide embrace blunts the sting of the poem. I'm going to ask once more for everybody to mute themselves. But there's more than the boxcar and more than the grave in the air. Even as these events hover over the poetry of both Celan and Pagis, and also haunt the poetry and prose of Amichai. There's also in all three what I call the sacred quotidian. It's in the first lines of Pagis's Ruach B'kivunim Mishtanim. And I'm going to try to share this too. One second. Okay, can you see that? Yes, can you see it?
Yes.
Thank you. עדיין אני סופה בדרגת אפס, כמעט נשימה. סובב, סובב, ושב על סביבותיי, אולי לשווא. These are just the first two verses of a long poem. And in English, I am as yet a storm of zero force, almost a breath, around and around, whirling in my cycles, perhaps in vain. Now, just think for a moment of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes, of the very beginning of Ecclesiastes. Hevel havalim, amar Kohelet. Hevel havalim, hakol havel. הולך אל דרום וסובב אל צפון, סובב סובב הולך הרוח, ועל סביבותיי שב הרוח. So even if you really don't know Hebrew, I think you can hear the resonances in that poem of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes. And finally, I want to bring, and these are just little tastes. Let's just think of ourselves as having a box of Valentine's chocolate. And what I'm offering you today are a few tastes of the different chocolates in the box. No calories in this one. I want to look at what I call the metaphysical reach in Amichai's poem. And I'm hoping that we'll have time to talk about this poem when I finish in a few minutes. So I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, do you see it? Somebody tell me, can you see Yehuda Amichai's poem?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
wait a minute. No, actually, we're still looking at the Kohelet. Yeah, does it go down on the screen?
Yehuda Amichai, no, you don't see it?
We're still on the screen you had previously.
All right, just a second.
It is Amichai, but I don't see the poem.
You don't see it?
It's the same one, Hevel Havalima Marco Helet. That's what we're looking at.
I think you need to scroll down.
Yeah.
I did. No, you can't see it?
It looks like it's what used to be the previous screen.
Okay, let me try this again, just a second.
There you go.
Can you see
That's
it?
it.
You see Yehuda Amichai?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll read it in Hebrew first. מי שהתעטף בטלית בנעוריו לא ישכח לעולם. ההוצאה משקית הקטיפה הרכה ופתיחת הטלית המקופלת. פריסה, נשיקת הצווארון לאורכו. הצווארון לפעמים רקום ולפעמים מוזהב. אחר כך בתנופה גדולה מעל הראש, כמו שמיים, כמו חופה, כמו מצנח. אחר כך לכרוך אותה סביב הראש, כמו במחבואים. אחר כך להתעטף בה כל הגוף, צמודה צמודה, ולהתקרבל כמו גולם של פרפר, ולפתוח כמו כנפיים ולעוף. ומדוע הטלית בפסים ולא במשבצות שחור לבן, כמו לוח שחמט? כי הריבועים הם סופיים ובלי תקווה, הפסים באים מאין סוף ויוצאים לאין סוף, כמו מסלולי המראה בשדה תעופה לנחיתת המלאכים ולהמראתם. מי שיתעטף בטלית לעולם לא ישכח, כשהוא יוצא מן הבריכה ומן הים, מתעטף במגבת גדולה ופורס אותה שוב מעל ראשו, ושוב מתקרבל בה צמוד צמוד, ורועד עוד קצת, וצוחק ומברך. Yuda Michai, whoever put on a tallis when he was young will never forget, taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded shawl, spreading it out, kissing the length of the neckband, embroidered or trimmed in gold, then swinging it in a great swoop overhead like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute, and then winding it around his head as in hide and seek, wrapping his whole body in it, close and slow, snuggling into it like the cocoon of a butterfly, then opening would-be wings to fly. And why is the tallis striped and not checkered black and white like a chessboard? Because squares are infinite and hopeless. Stripes come from infinity, and to infinity they go, like airport runways where angels land and take off. Whoever has put on a tallis will never forget. When he comes out of the swimming pool or the sea, he wraps himself in a large towel, spreads it out again over his head, and again snuggles into it close and slow, still shivering a little, and he laughs and blesses. You can see that poem, that beautiful poem, was translated by Chana Bloch, Zichrona Livracha, and Chana Kronfeld, Tibadel Lechayim Arukim. And it's a beautiful poem, and I decided to pretty much end with that poem because I'm hoping that it will, I have one or two more things to say, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk a little bit about it. But I want to end by just mentioning Jerusalem. With all its tragic history and potentially tragic future, it is the embodiment of the place where the dialectical, the either or, can suffocate us, or where the dialogical can liberate us. I'll give Celan the last word. One of the last things he wrote after his visit to Jerusalem was in a poetic fragment that he wrote to Ilana Shmueli, with whom he had known her as a child and with whom he had a rather romantic connection during his last visit to Jerusalem shortly before his death. And he wrote to her after visiting Jerusalem, "Sag, dass Jerusalem ist." Say that Jerusalem is. And I think leaving it open-ended like that is the proper way to think of our city with no horizon. To create horizons in the horizonless city of Jerusalem is the task, I think, of our great Paitanim. So I want to ask you all, if you have a glass of something, all I have here is some tea, but if you have a glass of something, please raise it to an open-ended future, to many piyutim in our lives, to and always to love. And now I want to invite you to open unmute yourselves, and please feel free to ask questions. And I'll take a look at the chat.
People can go into the participant section and raise their hand where it says raise hand. You click on that, or you can just raise your hand physically so Sidra can see.
I see actually that Peter wants to ask a question. So Peter, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? I see it in chat.
Sure. I just wanted, in your writing about Celan, you mentioned something about what you call historic political dirt. And that I think one writer said that Celan had cleansed his poetry of that historic dirt, but you feel that actually there are trace elements in his poetry. And I wish you would talk about that a little more and how it seeps into his poetry, where it comes in, what specifically you could point to. That's about it.
You always ask these very simple questions, Peter. I love it. I have to say there is actually somebody on this call, Vivian Liska, who is a much greater scholar of Ceylon than I am. I'm going to say one or two words, and then if she's willing to speak, Vivian lives always somewhere between Antwerp and Jerusalem, but right now she's in Jerusalem, right?
Yes.
Well, historical political dirt makes it sound like there's something nasty or gossip. I mean, the darknesses, as he said, the thousand darknesses of the speech that had become Nazi Deutsch, and that was the language. It was his native language, and it was the language that he wrote in. Although he was a polyglot, he knew many languages, and he translated many languages. And as I mentioned, he also in his last poems introduced a number of Hebrew words into his poetry, which were words that he had remembered from his childhood, but also words that he acquired later. He wrote in a German that had to be it had to somehow service the post-war world, but it was never void of the consciousness of the war. So, there are many wonderful scholars of Ceylon. I'm a dilettante when it comes to Ceylon, but I really do believe that he's a Paitan. And I deliberately played, I hope that it was clear, his reading of Todesfuge, because it is the greatest rendition of that poem that I've ever heard. Vivian, do you want to say something?
With pleasure. First of all, Sidra, thanks so much. I may know a few things about Ceylon, but you put him in a different context, and with Dan Pagis and Yuda Amichai together, this sheds a completely new light, and I'm learning so much from it. As to Peter, your question, I think that what Sidra does in calling Ceylon a Paitan is something very extraordinary, because it captures something that is simultaneous in Paul Celan, and that makes him deeply a Jewish poet, because there is something like that in the Jewish tradition, that you can sing a song to God at the same time as you accuse him of indifference, of absence, and that gesture, to bring out that gesture in Ceylon is absolutely crucial, and Sidra does this just wonderfully. And I've shown in connection to Ceylon's use of psalms, how he uses words where the single word points in two directions at the same time, into accusation and into celebration and hymn. And in Ceylon there is, the traditional in Tehillim, psalms are often lament ending in hymn, so as to prevent blasphemy, so as to prevent that lament turn into blasphemy, which it could if you just go on and on. But Ceylon does the two at the same time, making it impossible to have closure, to have that kind of affirmative closure. And this is precisely what Sidra does by bringing Todesfuge into the idea of what the Paitan does. So thank you, Sidra.
Well, thank you, Vivian. I couldn't have put any better. And I think that by locating the source of the piyut in the book of Psalms, we understand, because Psalms really is often reflecting either historical or world historical events in which God is not always seen as the most benign, but ultimately it's always resolved in the end. And I think that that's really what he's struggling with. what Ceylon is struggling with. Alex, you raised your hand. I'm trying to navigate here.
Yeah. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to ask you about the selection of the three poets that you made. What is the unifying element? And the reason I'm asking is that absent from this pantheon was Abraham Sutzkever, who was admittedly not a German poet, not a Hebrew poet, but definitely a poet of the Shoah. And if my question is, if you considered him and decided that he does not belong, or if there was another element that united these three poets that you decided to select.
You know, it's very interesting. I've never actually studied. I mean, I've read Sutzkever, but I've never studied him. And he also, of course, was a survivor and wrote. And it's actually an interesting thought. And I would actually go there. There's no reason why. There are other poets I left out, and they're not all necessarily Shoah poets. Amichai did not go through the Shoah. I think Zelda is a Paitanit. And even to some extent Leah Goldberg. I mean, there are other poetic voices that could have been brought in here. So these three are not meant to be, you know, the sum total. And Sutzkever would be an interesting one to think about. I can't really answer you right now on the fly, but I think that I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
The guy that I live with next door has asked me to go back and distinguish between the dialectical and the dialogical. Is that something you want me to elaborate on a little bit again? Is that, yes? I think I made it clear when I talk about the dialectic. I mean, this is something that we can talk about more at greater length, and I do in the book. I think that the challenge is, or the one who threw down the gauntlet really was Bialik. And Bialik has a very, very, in his poetry, but also in his essays, a very strict definition, a distinction between the holy and the secular, the holy and the profane, Kodesh v'chol. And you see it in his poetry as well. And his own conflict about the Hebrew language, which he helped to revive, about the language going out into the street and being defiled, is a reflection of that. It's defiled just by being spoken, and the white doves that have gone out pure in the morning come back defiled like ravens at night, in one of his poems. And he reflects a certain prevailing attitude in Israel. You find it everywhere. You find it in politics. You find, as I say, in the weather. People talk about, they don't know what to do with Amichai. They say, well, is he who mishorer dati lachiloniim or mishorer chiloni ladatiim? Is he a sacred poet for the profane, or a profane poet for the? They don't know what to do with him. And hi, Susan. and so I'm arguing that he actually reflects this the tradition of the piyut, which brings these all together. And I also mentioned the metaphysical poets, the English metaphysical poets that many of you will be familiar with, because they do the same thing. You think of poetry of John Donne, you think of the poetry of Emily Dickinson or Wallace Stevens, and the way in which the world is celebrated in non-dialectical ways. Susan, you had your hand up. Susan Suleiman. But you have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself. Can't hear you.
Hi. So good to hear you and see you, Sidra, from far away. So I think what you just said about, Bialik and the sacred and the profane is so beautifully contested in the Amichai poem about the talis, right? In other words, so I'd love to hear your thought. I don't know Amichai as well as you do, that's for sure. But it seemed to me that, making the equivalence between the talus and the beach towel, as you come out of the water. I mean, it's just an incredibly daring and marvelous thing to do, right? So there you have it. Would that be an example of dialogue versus dialectic? In other words, for Amichai, it seems like there's no real contradiction or no real conflict between enveloping yourself in the talus and enveloping yourself, after taking a beautiful swim. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. It's one of my favorite poems. First of all, I think that Hannah did a beautiful job in calling it talus and not talit, because the talus is a much more familiar kind of Yiddish inflected way of talking about the prayer shawl. And there's just something very intimate about this whole poem. But the thing that most struck me was how many metaphors, how many similes there are. Okay, it's like why it's taking it out of the bag, etc., swinging it like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute, like it's in hide and seek, like a cocoon, like, and then it goes on and on and on. It can be anything. And what I love the most is, and of course, like a towel, but he's also coming out of the sea. And if he's coming out of the sea, he's not in Jerusalem, right? So that incorporates it incorporates Tel Aviv. It incorporates the act of actually wrapping yourself in a towel after being in the beach in Tel Aviv, which kind of sanctifies the beach, and literally chol, which means sand. So I think this is in a way the best, and this was in his last book. It was a book in which he both acknowledges the horrors that happened after 1967 in Jerusalem, the threats, and at the same time, he really remains a paitan. He really remains a sacred poet of the quotidian. Thanks a lot for your question, Susan.
Can I say something? Recently I heard a program about, and they featured poems of secular spirituality, and I wonder whether you would consider that poem exactly that.
Say more about it. I'm not sure I understand.
Secular spirituality, because he's bringing the spirituality of the Talit into the secular world. He has filled with the wonder of the ocean, and has a religious moment, but it's in a secular context. And so there's somehow a synthesis of traditional religious feeling with a secular religious feeling for the world.
Well, it's a refusal to make that distinction. I mean, that's the point. It's not that the world is either secular or sacred. We go into the synagogue or we enter a church and we're in the sacred space. It's a celebration of the world as sacred space.
Well, it's synthesized. It's a synthesis.
In a way, it's a celebration of also poetry making, right? Because we can imagine all of these things. That's the act of the poet. Is there anybody else who wants to? I'm looking to see if there are any more. Mikal, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I couldn't find a place to raise my hand, so
it's okay.
I said something in the chat that I was wanting you to talk about, but about this, before you move on, I guess the thing that just sort of bowls me over and I love about this poem is Amichai's wit, and in doing that with all those metaphors, they're all ways in which one could worship. I mean, they're all, so one's faith could be a parachute, or it can be wrap you like a cocoon and you emerge as something else, or it can be, so with such economy, he is saying here are so many ways to to connect with a sense, in some sense, to the divine, whatever that is. And he doesn't get into the trap of trying to tell us what it is. And but I was hoping, listening, because these are not languages that I speak, listening to Celan and Page, you reading Pages and Amakai, I'm struck by the difference in musicality in each of the poets. And it seems like Amakai almost avoids obvious musicality. And I was wondering if you wanted to say, if there's anything to say about that in connection with what you're thinking about today, or maybe.
Okay, thank you. I want to respond before I lose the trend, because there's a couple of things you said. Number one, it's interesting. You said wit and economy about Amichai's poem. You could argue that it lacks economy, because in a way it points to kind of infinite acts of metaphor making. It's like this, it's like that, it could be like anything, right? And that really is the metaphysical reach. At the same time, the wit is also what reflects the metaphysical poet. The act, in other words, exercising the imagination. The imagination itself is being celebrated here. Mm-hmm. As far as music is concerned, I think it's really interesting, because one of the things that those of you who have had any exposure to Israeli culture know that so many poems over these generations have been set to music, including many of Amichai's poems. Whether they're musical in themselves, whether they have what you call musicality, is an interesting question, but they have certainly been set to music the way the piyutim always were. And I deliberately began by playing that piyut so that we would hear how the piyutim are sung. They're always sung in religious contexts. Yeah, thank you. Froma, you had your hand up. Hi. You have to unmute yourself.
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, all these poets are so wonderful. But it just struck me about the Amichai poem is that it seems to be, the title is open, closed, open.
No, that's the title. Wait, let me stop. No, that's the title of the whole volume.
Of the whole volume.
The last volume, Patuach Sago Patuach.
Give these titles to the poem itself. It doesn't have a title.
It doesn't really have a title. That's right.
So,
right.
But just the very, just the choice of that phrase as the title of the book gives you something to think about in terms of Amichai's poetry and his view of the world. That something is both open and closed and unopened. In other words, it seems to me, your entire argument about these poets struggling with language, struggling with ways of secularization. So I just thought I would throw that out.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think, and this was his last volume of poetry. And it's a very reflective volume. I mean, I highly recommend, for those of you who are not familiar, or for those of you who are familiar with Amichai, that you get a hold of a copy of Open, Closed, Open, because it really is his sort of last testament. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And he has many, and it was true all through his writing career. He has many poems that they don't have titles, but they're part of poetic sequences. And that's what this one is. Vivian, did you have a hand up again? Unmute yourself.
Yes. I wanted to say something that my husband responded to when he heard you. When he heard you talk about the talit. First he said, but wait a minute, why is talis? And he comes from the talis world. But he said, maybe our Israeli son-in-law would say that it's talit and not talis. But he said, actually, it is true that the sensation of being wrapped in a towel by your mother, and of being, that sensation of protection, he said, actually, from now on, whether I believe that it has to be talis or not for everybody, it sure is for me. But from now on, it definitely will be for me forever. That with that sensation will come the poem and Sidra the moment when you read it. So thank you.
Well, I think we can all wrap ourselves in this poem because I agree. I mean, I think it really is, whether you think of yourself as a child wrapped in a towel by your mother, or for men particularly, the first memory of being wrapped, if they went to synagogue with their father, being wrapped in a talit. And I remember it with my father, but it's mainly the experience of men. It's a moment of caring. It's the moment of protection, and then it becomes a springboard. It becomes for all the other possible ways of feeling protected in the world.
I think that's a wonderful note to close on, unless Susan has her hand up again. I don't know if she wants to.
No.
Okay.
I was from before. Okay. Well, I want to just thank everybody really for being here. It includes friends and family from every walk of life. I'm not going to stop, and you all know who you are, but if you have time to stay on, we can schmooze a little, because this is called learning and schmoozing, or schmoozing and learning, or something. So I'm happy to stay on for a little while if you can, and schmooze a little. There are so many wonderful, dear people on this, but I just want to thank all of you for being here, for taking the time. We're all zoomed out, but taking the time in the middle of your day, or at the end of your day if you're in Israel, or the beginning of your day if you're in Vancouver. And just thank you very much.
We want to thank you, Sidra, for traveling all those miles and crossing all those oceans to be here with us. And it was just really fabulous, a great tribute to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sidra, I wanted to know if there is some bookstore in Jerusalem that you could send an address where we could order books from.
I'm looking to see who's speaking. I can't see you.
Oh, it's Peter.
Peter.
Yeah, hi. Sidra, I have a problem. I'm trying to order books from Israel, from Jerusalem, and I don't have any good bookseller. So if you know some address,
of course I do.
Or
not only do I know
great.
them, but I want to give them business. So it's Adraba, and Adraba. Let me give you their phone number, and you can
great.
the 972 number and ask for Jonathan. And you know, they're a small bookseller, but they have everything. They also have my book, by the way.
Yay!
But I think I send a PDF, so anybody who knows Hebrew wants to read it.
Yeah, but you know.
Let me just
Do you
give
know
you
the name of Sidra's book? I have to find out.
Wait a minute. Adraba. They're a wonderful small bookstore in Jerusalem that we're trying to keep alive during this period. So you would call 972 567 1266.
Great.
And where are they in Jerusalem?
They're in Rehavia.
Rehavia.
If you don't know them, on your next trip to Jerusalem, assuming that we ever take trips at all.
We will.
Yeah, we will. We will. Yeah.
Who's that?
Hi, Ruth. Hi, Helen. Hi, Norm. Hi, Miriam.
May you all be wrapped b'tzeil kanafecha.
Yeah, we need Jim here to give us a benediction, right?
Hi, Irv.
Hi, Sidra. Bye, Bernie. Gotta go.
Oh,
Thank you.
Bernie, you're going to be with us next month. Can you give us a date yet? You're going to contact me privately, but we're waiting for the date. We're looking forward to having you here.
Oh, I thought you were going to supply me a date.
Whoa.
I offered you 2 dates. We'll be in touch. I offered you 2 dates, but maybe you missed the email.
No, I didn't miss it. I
Right.
just got distracted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we loved your article, your
In the New Yorker.
opinion piece in the Times.
The Times, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, Bernie. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, in the
Yeah.
Times.
Bye-bye.
Fabulous. Thank you for everything. Mwah.
Okay, yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
This
That
was
was wonderful.
fabulous. Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy your lox and
Bye.
Take care.